Welcome to The Verdict, a podcast by the Carlson law firm. And in this series, we're going all about car collisions, the injuries that happen because of them, and the topics surrounding them. I'm your host, Jeffrey Hinkson. And in this episode, we're going all about traumatic brain injuries and motorcycles. And in this episode, I'm joined by Julie Peschel and Kathryn. Thank you both for being on here. And then if we can get both of y'all to introduce yourselves, starting with Julie.
Hi, yes, my name is Julie Peschel. I'm a partner with the Carlson law firm here in our Temple office location. I have been with the Carlson law firm for 14 and a half years, almost 15 years now. And I've been practicing personal injury trial law my entire stint here at the firm, and I'm looking forward to discussing TBIs with you today.
Thank you for being on. And Kathryn?
Yes, my name is Kathryn. I am also a partner here with our firm, and I run our Bryan College Station office. I've been with the firm for a little over 16 years, and just like Julie said, I have done personal injury cases for my entire time with the firm.
Okay, great. Thank you also for being on today, Kathryn. Yeah, and like I said, this episode, we're going all about TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, and motorcycles. And I wanted to cover this topic because TBIs are a severe injury and they can have a lifelong impact on someone. And also motorcycles, I want to cover motorcycles because usually when people discuss car collisions, car accidents, they automatically think of cars. They don't think of motorcycles. And I wanted to put some emphasis on motorcycles today. So I wanted to throw out the first question. Julie, I want to start off with you. What is a traumatic brain injury?
Okay, well, that's a great question. A traumatic brain injury is, we also, you heard me already refer to it this way, but we call them for short TBIs. And what they are is really just a disruption to the normal function of the brain. And it's usually caused by like a bump, a blow to the head, a jolt to the head. And usually you can see a TBI range from a mild TBI, a moderate TBI, all the way to a severe TBI, based on really the symptoms that present and the mechanism of injury.
Okay. And because you had mentioned symptoms, what are the differences between the symptoms from like more of a lighter TBI to more of a severe TBI?
Okay, so usually what you see with a mild TBI, you can see headaches, you can see memory problems, balance and coordination problems, you can see difficulty concentrating and what we call brain fog. A lot of times people have sensitivity to light, or sensitivity to sounds. They may have dizziness or ringing in the ears. A lot of times you'll see nausea, slurred speech, and just fatigue. So those are sometimes what you see with mild TBIs. And when it comes to a more severe TBI, you can see all those same symptoms. But a lot of times you're going to have somebody with more severe TBI that has sustained a loss of consciousness anywhere from several minutes to hours. You might see a more persistent headache, more repeated vomiting and nausea. They may have seizures. A lot of times they'll present with dilation of their eyes and their pupils. Sometimes they'll have like fluid that comes out of their ears or their nose, and really a more pronounced loss of coordination. So, and that's just the physical symptoms. You can also have like cognitive symptoms with a more severe TBI, just really profound confusion and memory loss, and personality changes like agitation. And really people, they don't just like, their personalities change to the point where they almost become combative when they have a severe TBI.
Well, sometimes they then become somebody who maybe beforehand had a passive personality become more of an aggressive person. a lot of times we'll see heightened sensitivity to certain senses. You know, clients will describe, you know, just an intense things like a soft sweater rubbing across their arm might feel like razor blades going across them. And so those are all kind of things that we begin to realize and see that would be a TBI.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. And I'm guessing like some of the, Kathryn, like some of these milder ones, like headaches and stuff, I'm guessing those are some of like the early signs of a TBI, like right after a car crash?
So that's one of the unique things is that with a TBI, particularly the milder ones, and when we say mild, you know, it's not like saying, oh, I have a mild cold versus I have the flu. Any TBI is significant and devastating to somebody's life. But yes, from a medical standpoint, they do classify them as a mild TBI versus a more severe one. But when we have a milder TBI, oftentimes these will actually go misdiagnosed early on. And that's because if, say, they present at the emergency room, but they've got a broken leg, the doctor's emphasis and focus is going to be on that broken leg. And, you know, they may be complaining about a headache or, you know, ringing in their ears, but because that's not the most pronounced injury that needs to be addressed, it doesn't get addressed early on. Oftentimes when we start seeing these milder TBIs identified, is as they are treating with other providers, they continue to have these same symptoms that don't dissipate within days or weeks following the wreck. And it leads the doctor to begin to question if there's something more severe going on, such as a TBI.
Okay. And because that sort of led into my next question, Julie, was that because sometimes after a car crash, I might not, you know, we hear about, you know, comas, going into comas right after car crashes, but if I don't fall into a coma or I don't lose consciousness, like how will I know if I have a TBI? Is it like I just go to a doctor or wait it out? Like,
Yeah, so I think it depends on, you know, what symptoms you're having. You know, you want to always be on the lookout for those things we already talked about, like headaches that are really persistent, sensitivity to light and sound. And so, you know, if before the crash you didn't have those symptoms and you started, you definitely want to go see your primary care physician and get it checked out. A lot of times at the ER, they may take a CAT scan of your head because you tell them I was involved in a wreck and I hit my head on you know, something in the vehicle, and they'll take a CAT scan. And a lot of times it doesn't find any, you know, objective findings that are important on the CAT scan that demonstrate a head injury, but that doesn't mean that you don't still have a head injury. So it's more symptom based that you find out that you have this type of injury. And one thing that I thought was kind of important to note as well, that takes us back to how you get a head injury. A lot of people think you have to actually strike your head on, you know, an object like glass or the steering wheel, but you don't even have to do that. You can just be involved in a collision where, you know, you have whiplash, and just the very nature of your brain inside of your head kind of having that really fast acceleration, deceleration, that can cause a head injury. And so that kind of goes to what Kathryn was saying, that they can oftentimes be missed.
yeah, because that's interesting because even me myself, I didn't know that something like that could happen just based off whiplash. I would think it would be more, you have to at least strike, have your head stricken to have that happen.
Well, and oftentimes what you will see is people do strike their head on something in the car, but because it wasn't glass or a steering wheel or something that broke, but they've hit their head on the back of the seat when it really in like a rear end collision where their head is going to go back and forth. So you'll see a head injury that way. Again, these more milder ones are the ones that are oftentimes overlooked initially, but when these symptoms that Julie described persist and continue, that usually is what will prompt a doctor to recommend further testing to evaluate to determine if there is a TBI that has occurred.
Okay.
And one thing to add on, you know, you say, well, how will you know if you have a TBI? A lot of times it's not the patient themselves that figure out that they have the TBI. A lot of times it's more apparent to family members and loved ones, because the person that they knew and loved is no longer their normal self and they're not acting like their normal self. And that's how it becomes diagnosed that they have a TBI.
That's one of the reasons why it's always important for you to have a if you're able, have a family member attend doctor's appointments with you, or tell your doctor what they're observing. I've had a client before who was not initially diagnosed with a TBI. If you asked him, he would say no. But in speaking with his wife, and then we later spoke with coworkers and friends, they were all describing very similar behavioral changes that were what they were describing as he's just not himself anymore. And when and it was, he had a very short fuse and short temper and aggressive, and some of his mannerisms had changed because he was having that coupled with these persistent headaches. When his neck pain resolved and the headaches didn't go away, his wife mentioned it at an appointment to the doctor, and the doctor recognized that and then referred them out to be seen to evaluate for a head injury.
Oh, wow. And like hearing that, because I'm hearing how stories about how they come in later. And after, covering in other episodes about like insurances and stuff, like how does that play out? Because we hear a lot about how insurances try to be quote unquote like stingy and stuff like that. How does that play out in terms with the TBI? Julie?
Well, so do you mean insurance companies oftentimes try to rush to settlement? They'll try to get to people and get them to accept less than what their case is worth.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important that if you're involved in an injury, especially if you're suspecting that you have like a serious injury, such as what a TBI is, you should consult an attorney and get an attorney involved right away. Definitely don't negotiate with the insurance company, because you may be having these issues and these problems, far into the future, and you really need to make sure that you are compensated accordingly. And that's not always readily known right at the beginning right after a collision or after an accident.
Okay, and I wanted to follow up with Kathryn, basically following up that question is like, if it's more severe and I do happen to get in the coma at the time of the crash, how do I proceed? Because although the person in the coma won't be able to actually do anything themselves at that moment, what would that process look like?
Well, if you are incapacitated, one, if you have somebody who has a durable power of attorney for you, they can act on your behalf, hire an attorney on your behalf. And oftentimes, if people don't already have a power of attorney that their family is aware of or anything, the family members themselves, whether it be their wife, wife or husband, maybe their children or their parents, depending on their relationship, will hire or reach out to an attorney to begin helping the victim. As if the victim passes away, then there are certain procedures that we go through to ensure that the correct representative for the deceased victim is represented. But if they do come out of the coma, at that point, then they begin to be more actively involved in their case. And if they become of a capacity to be able to sign a contract, they'll sign a new contract just so that the attorney can continue to do the work and continue working on everything. But it's thankfully, family members are usually in a scenario where somebody's in a coma. The family is the one who reaches out to us first to at least get us involved. And we appreciate when families do that, because there is so much information that can be lost in any case very early on. And so the sooner you can have an attorney involved in the case, the more quickly they can secure evidence and ensure that everything is properly documented. Just, from the minute that wreck happened, the insurance company was aware of it. They were made aware of it very quickly on. In large like commercial vehicles, they oftentimes will have an investigator out on scene while they are still investigating. So unfortunately for the victim, they don't know immediately to contact an attorney. So we want to get involved as quickly as possible to make sure that playing field is evened out.
Okay. And also because going along with that question, Julie, I want to pass along to you on this one, is that can an insurance company try to do any type of settlement or try to settle while you're in a coma, while you're incapacitated?
Well, I would say that depends, because if you have a family member that has that durable medical power of attorney, they would technically have the ability to talk to an insurance company. So I wouldn't put anything past the insurance company. They could attempt to try and negotiate, but unless that person has the power of attorney to act on your behalf, they shouldn't be able to actually settle with that person while you're in a coma. But this is a little trickier because we're talking about severe TBIs and you're talking about a coma. But as we've kind of already discussed, a lot of times people, they may be not in a coma, but generally under a lot of medication or somewhat incapacitated, but maybe it's not clear that they're incapacitated. And that's when it's a little more problematic, because they can definitely attempt to just try and discuss settlement negotiations with somebody who's injured while they're still recovering. And so it's difficult to prove that you were incapacitated and not in that right mindset to sign a settlement release. So it's super important if you're having, any types of symptoms, that you do try and seek out legal counsel to make sure that you're protected.
And we have actually seen that occur. I know I personally have, I can imagine Julie has. Unfortunately, people will contact us, a few weeks later and they'll say, yeah, the insurance company called me the day after the wreck and I was on, the medication the ER gave me. I wasn't really paying attention, but they just said I needed to sign some documents and they were going to help get the bills taken care of. And they will send to us what they've signed, and it was a release for up to a certain dollar amount, or an ER bill up to a certain dollar amount, when they don't even know how much their emergency room bill is yet. And we have seen releases, and those are very, we can try to contest them, but like Julie said, oftentimes when it's not a situation of you were in a coma and incapacitated, it's oftentimes a little bit harder to be able to establish and prove that you were not of a mindset to be able to understand what you were doing.
Okay, yeah, because that does seem tricky, because like, yeah, if you're not in the mindset, but you can't prove that you weren't in the mindset, yeah, it just seems tricky all around. Yeah. Also, I wanted to dive into like some of like I guess I want to call them consequences, but like the lifelong impact of a TBI. Julie, what are some of like the impacts that someone can have from a TBI?
So I would say it can impact somebody's life physically, cognitively, emotionally, and behaviorally. Like you can have changes in all facets of your life. You can have ongoing physical symptoms such as, ongoing headaches, or what they call post-traumatic headaches, that you have to take, medications for your life to try and control, not just medications to control it. Some people have to take medications to prevent them, in addition to control them after they've occurred. You can have, that ongoing sensitivity to light and noise. I've seen one client who had to literally wear sunglasses inside of a room because they couldn't stand the light, just in a normal room after having a TBI. Things like that. You can have, again, the emotional and the cognitive symptoms. The brain fog can be ongoing. Memory issues, sleep issues, difficulty with concentration. And a lot of times all of these issues that people are dealing with physically and emotionally and cognitively leave this same person down the road of depression and anxiety, because their life is just not the same. And I would say one of the bigger factors that they can have, or consequences, is just their familial relationships are affected. We've talked a lot about this personality change and aggression, but the best people to talk to are the family members of those affected, because they're living with somebody that they don't know. They might be quick to temper. They're just not the same. And I would say that's probably one of the bigger impacts that I've seen with my clients that suffer from ongoing issues. Is it affects not just them, but it affects the entire family and their loved ones as well.
And taking that one step further, because you do have those behavioral relationship type changes, just like Julie's had it impact their family, I've had it impact clients' employment positions. Because whereas your family is maybe a little more forgiving of your outburst or your temper, your employer is not always, and so it can actually result in negative performance evaluation, which reduces their income potential. And in fact, I've had one client in one case lose his job over it, and so it impacts their ability to have gainful employment.
Mhm. And while we're sort of on this, like the lifelong consequences, Kathryn, I want to ask you further, like, how does, the lifelong consequence of a TBI impact a case in general? And how does a client with a TBI, how does that case differ from, say, a car crash where it's not dealing with a traumatic brain injury?
Well, one of the things that we have to do when we have a traumatic brain injury that's not resolving and it's going to be lifelong and ongoing is to make sure that we are able to explain that to both a insurance company in negotiating and discussing settlement, but also if we take it to trial, explaining that to a jury so that a jury can place an economic value on it. Unfortunately, in our system, we can't fix the injury for them. In fact, we seek compensation to allow them to have the resources needed to provide the medical care that they're going to need. And so the way we do that is we actually will have a medical doctor do an evaluation and provide an opinion to us on what services and therapies and treatments will be needed for that patient moving forward in their life and what that cost is going to be. Because we want to make sure that when we are presenting the injury, that we're not just presenting what we have here and now, but what we are going to have lifelong. And that same similar process we do when clients have, say, a back injury that's ongoing for the rest of their lifetime. We have a doctor who will evaluate and provide a medical opinion based on what the cost of that will be to the patient. And so that way we are presenting both for past damages, but as well as future economic losses through medical bills and medical costs.
Yeah, and because I also wanted to throw in a quick fact here is that, we're talking about costs, is that according to the CDC, the cost of treating a survivor of a TBI is estimated that the cost of caring for a survivor of a severe traumatic brain injury is between $600,000 and $1,875,000. So it can be a
and that's why we typically have to use a medical expert to quantify that, because that's a hard thing for just somebody who's never been through this or gone through it to understand what the financial impact a TBI will have on somebody for the ongoing portion of their lifetime, whether that be through medical services or counseling services or medication. It is something they are going to not only personally deal with, but they're going to financially deal with the rest of their life.
Okay. And so I wanted to move on from TBIs. We covered TBIs, and I wanted to go more into the motorcycle side, like I had mentioned at the top of the episode. And Julie, I want to throw it to you. When dealing with motorcycles, is there a difference in the process between a motorcycle crash and just a typical car auto crash?
So I wouldn't say there's necessarily a difference in the case process per se, but what I will say is oftentimes when we are dealing with motorcycle crashes, usually we see much more severe injuries as well as more likely death. And it's because the fact that somebody that's riding a motorcycle has direct impact either with the other vehicle involved, or sometimes also, obviously the pavement, or if they're thrown off of the motorcycle. And in Texas, I don't know if you know this, but in Texas, if you're over the age of 21 and there's two categories, like you either have to complete an approved motorcycle safety course or at least give proof of 10,000 or more of like medical insurance. You don't have to wear a helmet in the state of Texas. So, a lot of times we see people in motorcycle accidents that aren't wearing a helmet, and that kind of goes hand in hand with where these TBIs come from. Oftentimes in car wreck cases, TBIs can be overlooked, but they're more likely to occur and be identified early on when you're dealing with a motorcycle accident. It's also, motorcyclists oftentimes have a higher likelihood of being put at fault. So that's something we see a little different from car wreck cases. So, you know, a motorcyclist is oftentimes more injured or incapacitated. So their side of the story isn't given to the police. You know, the only side the police gets to hear, usually at the scene, unless it's a very minor accident, is that of the other person involved. So that in turn leads to more times the motorcyclist being put at fault for the collision, which makes proceeding on a case a little more difficult. We have to go hire independent, you know, accident reconstructionists to go out and basically evaluate all the evidence and provide their opinion regarding to how that collision actually occurred. And so, you know, making sure that we can secure the evidence early on, get those witnesses to the accident interviewed, get scene photographs, you know, vehicle photographs, all of that's super important in a motorcycle case so that we can really make sure we can shore up proving the at-fault party was at fault.
And so Kathryn, because Julie said something interesting, is that the factors at play which a motorcyclist doesn't have to wear a helmet. And I wanted to ask, when someone isn't wearing a helmet, does that play a factor in the case? Because usually, you know, we wear a helmet, okay, that's safety protection, you know, they can, insurance companies and stuff can just consider, oh, he's being safe, but without a helmet, is there a difference?
So that's actually really a good question, because what Julie pointed out is the requirements for you to not have to wear a helmet. Just because the law doesn't say you have to wear a helmet doesn't mean it won't play into an insurance company's evaluation when they're looking at your head injury and the extent of your injuries. But even more so, what I would look at is how would a jury perceive your injuries if you having a head injury and you didn't even take a precaution of wearing a helmet. So I think it's kind of more of the, for lack of better phrasing, the common sense approach to that one. And that is, if you're going to ride a motorcycle, wear a helmet. You know, if you have a motorcycle collision, the likelihood that your head is going to hit something is far more significant than in any other type of collision. But the fact that you do not have a helmet does not give the insurance company an automatic out, but it will be something that is taken into consideration, just like comparative to you not having a seatbelt on. Now, the difference in that scenario is that we do have laws that require you to wear a seatbelt, and so that plays an even more significant when you don't have a seatbelt. But with the motorcycle, I have had clients before say, well, you know, the law says I don't have to have one. Yes, you're exactly right. But a jury is going to apply their own knowledge, life's experiences, and I don't know anyone who would look at somebody and say, well, maybe you should have had a helmet on. What would that have minimized by?
Now, because I'm thinking about all this stuff, you know, different situations in motorcycles and how sometimes someone might be riding a motorcycle and they might have someone else riding with them. And Julie, I want to ask you, is there anything else that like differentiates if someone else is riding, like just like basically hugging the driver of the motorcycle, whether they have a helmet or not? Like, is there a difference in the case with that?
I would say there's probably not a difference in the case. Obviously, you never want a passenger to be distracting the driver. So if there's something going on that's distracting the driver, you know, that can play into it. But you know,
in all facts and scenarios,
and, you know, we've probably seen it all. So, but I mean, generally, if they're just holding on and acting as a normal passenger, I wouldn't think that would affect any of the liability or, you know, put any extra fault on the driver.
Okay. And
one thing I have seen though that can not so much differentiate, but a factor that affects the injury level. Oftentimes you have a motorcycle rider, particularly a more experienced motorcycle rider, if they can anticipate a collision that is inevitable, they will take certain maneuvers to try to avoid, not avoid, but maybe minimize their own impact, whether that be to lay the bike down, veer off, take evasive action, even though they know it's still going to cause a wreck. But it's better, as I've had a client tell me, I would rather lay my bike down than smack into the car. And so if they can do anything, whereas the passenger who's riding on the back oftentimes doesn't even see that about to happen and has no anticipation. And we will see even more severe injuries in a scenario where maybe there's not an impact with the other vehicle between the driver and the passenger.
That's interesting. And, going, off the topic of motorcycles, well, on the topic still, but like insurances, like, because, when people start driving, they just turn 16, start driving and stuff, they have to have insurance by law, some type of insurance. I'm guessing that's the same thing with motorcycles, or is there like, and then dealing with TBIs also more specifically, is there certain insurances that cover TBIs? Kathryn?
I'll take that question. So in Texas, we have motorcycle insurance falls under the same as auto insurance requirements. So we have our Texas minimum limits of insurance, which sadly is actually only a $30,000/$60,000 policy, which means the minimum coverage you can have is $30,000 to cover for one person or $60,000 in liability. So when a motorcycle rider is hit by another car, even if they're killed, there may only be $30,000 of insurance. So one of the things that we encourage all drivers, whether they're a motorcycle rider or a vehicle driver, is on your own auto insurance policy, carrying underinsured motorists, uninsured motorists, and personal injury protection with the maximum amount of coverage that you can afford within your family's budget. Because those coverages are designed to protect you if you are in a situation when you are hit by somebody who carries the state minimum limits.
Okay. And then circling back off of insurances, Julie, when, we talked about helmets and, how, some motorcyclists will wear their helmet, some won't, but in a case where they do, I want to just ask, can motorcycle helmets be defective?
I would say absolutely a motorcycle helmet it may be defective. There's several different ways a motorcycle helmet may fail. When your head impacts the pavement, that helmet could crack upon impact. You could have issues with the chin strap or the buckle. Lots of different parts are on that helmet that could fail. But that's exactly why we ask our clients, if we have this type of accident, to allow us to inspect the helmet. It's really important that we get that helmet in our possession and that it's stored in a safe, secure location, because you can't have a defective helmet case without actually having the helmet. So that's step number one. You got to have the helmet. And we need to inspect it to see, what potential issues may have occurred with that helmet. Some freebie advice: you should, as a motorcyclist, periodically check the condition of your helmet. You want to make sure that it doesn't need replacement. My child rides horses, and so I kind of know about this, not from motorcycles, but from horseback riding, that even horseback riding helmets have a shelf life, is what I'll call it. They only are good for so long. So, generally motorcycle riders will replace their helmets about every 3 to 5 years. And manufacturers will actually recommend that you replace your helmet about every 7 years. And they go off of the production date on that, not the, sale date. So that's something important to know. If you're out there riding motorcycles, you need to be looking at that sticker that's underneath your liner of your helmet to find out when was the production date. And obviously you want to make sure that you're not riding a motorcycle with a helmet that's really old and not not as safe anymore, because that will make it harder for us to prove that it's defective. So
the additional along with that same lines, kind of a freebie advice is we need to be able to know where where and who has owned that. So just like you're always recommended, don't buy a car seat at a garage sale. Don't buy a helmet at a garage sale either, because then you don't know what condition it's been kept in, how it's been stored, if it's been involved in another impact collision of any sort. Helmets are one of those where you want to take the money and effort, buy that new.
Yeah, because that was interesting to me because like I didn't even know that motorcycles helmets had a shelf life because while y'all were answering those questions, like I was thinking, I was like, what happens if, I get a motorcycle helmet at a pawn shop or something like that, and say a crash does happen with the motorcycle helmet and it does happen to be defective, is the case gonna go, does it, I know there's gonna be like the regular car crash and the motorcycle crash. Now, is there also gonna be the fact of am I going after the helmet manufacturer or what is that process like, Julie?
So definitely when you're trying to bring a defective helmet case, there's certain things that you have to show. You have to show that one, there's either a manufacturing or design defect of that helmet. So yeah, you would be going after the manufacturer or the designer if it's a different company of who is creating this helmet. And also there can be inadequate safety warnings because everything nowadays has a safety warning on it.
Yeah.
So if there's inadequate warnings, that's another way you can say the helmet's defective. Excuse me. But there's other things you have to prove, like were you using that helmet as intended by the manufacturer? Were you injured because of that helmet being defective? And some specifics that go into it. And if you're buying your helmet used at a pawn shop, that makes it a little more difficult probably to prove that helmet's defective, because again, we don't know the chain of custody. We don't know who owned that helmet before. We don't know were there alterations done. If there were alterations done, there is no case. So, has it been involved in any kind of prior incident? So, also things at pawn shops tend to be older things a lot of times, not always, but something you have to kind of look at is with any type of product defect case, there's something called a statute of repose. It means that if the product itself is more than 15 years old, then there is no case. So that's where looking at that production date on the sticker comes into play to find out, well, when was this helmet even, produced? Because if it was more than 15 years ago, then you definitely don't have a case. So they're definitely more complex cases, but very interesting.
Yeah, and there's one other thing, because you had mentioned, which is interesting to me, is like the customization aspect of helmets and how they play into, does it mess up like the case and things of that nature. I want to know, is there like some examples you had came across by, or of like, because I want to know, like, if I paint a helmet, does that mess it up, or is it more into like the design of taking apart the helmet and things of that nature?
I would say if you're altering the helmet in any way, I don't know that painting it would matter, and Kathryn might have a different opinion, but I think something that doesn't substantially alter the design of the helmet. So if there's padding inside the helmet, there's straps to hold it on, the things that make up the mechanics of the helmet, as long as that's not altered, I would think it would be fine for painting or putting placing stickers or whatever on the helmet. But anything substantially altering it would definitely be a no-no.
I think when it comes to painting and altering it in any way such as that would be one where you would want to have discussed it with somebody who is familiar with the chemical makeup of how a helmet is painted, because depending on what type of product you used on it or stripper or anything to adjust to it, if it changes the actual makeup of the helmet, then you have altered it. Again, what Julie kind of pointed out, putting a sticker on it, no, I don't think that would necessarily do anything. But if you're altering the design and factors that honestly the company that manufactured the helmet had to have approved in order for them to produce the helmet, and you're altering those aspects of it, then yes, that would ultimately potentially negate a design defect or a manufacturing defect.
Okay, yeah. Because that's good to know, because people might just see like, oh, I'm painting it or whatever, but thinking about like the chemical makeup and how it can really alter the helmet. Yeah, that's good to know.
I say
Yeah.
that's one of those where proceed with caution.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And lastly, I want to ask both of y'all, is like, is there any stories or anything you would like to share about cases regarding TBIs or motorcycles? Kathryn, can we start with you?
I can actually one of the TBI cases that I dealt with was a rear end auto collision case. It initially presented as a more severe. Thankfully, it did get better as time progressed, but not completely. But she was a high school student, and so one of the large things that we evaluated and used in that was using her school records to show to the insurance company the effect that this TBI had on her life, because she had gone from a regular student who she actually had to be classified into a special education department to receive the modifications she needed to her day-to-day routine. They actually had to provide her during the day what they considered brain breaks. And that is because what I learned was that intense focus and attention by her on a task, or if she was in chemistry and she was laser focused on something, it would tax her brain that already was dealing with this injury, and she would actually have regression. And so what they had to design into her school day was time periods for her to go into a dark room that didn't have light, sound, activity, other students, to allow her time for her brain to rest. So that was using those modifications and showing a significant change in her performance at school. Both, and then we used testimony from her own teachers of the changes they noticed in her interactions with her fellow students, her interactions with teachers, and what they had noticed in the classroom setting.
Okay. And Julie, do you have any cases you would like to share?
Yeah, so one case that I'm thinking of where the client sustained a TBI was one of those where it was pretty apparent at the scene that they ended up having a TBI. And that's, a lot of this comes down to the mechanism of injury. When somebody is hit and this person actually struck the back of their head and shattered the glass of their pickup truck with the back of their head. And, they're walking around the scene of the collision when their loved one arrives at the scene, just in a daze and a fog, just really out of it. And of course, then all the other symptoms of a TBI started to appear, from, the headaches, the personality changes, all of those things. Really, that was an easier case of identifying a TBI early on. So that, when you have that mechanism of injury that ties it to really striking the back of your head, that makes it easy. But I'm trying to think with TBIs, a lot of the cases that I've seen over the years have been, fairly sad, because the people really are altered. And even when their medical records are showing it, like Kathryn said, as a mild TBI, it really truly does affect their life. And these are people who have businesses they're trying to run, and families that they're trying to care for, and it truly does change their life in all ways. So
makes me think of the client I had who his TBI was what would be classified as a mild one, but his description of what mornings were like for him, he didn't drink alcohol, and he said, I wake up every morning and I feel like I have a hangover. I have brain fog. And he actually was struggling with his employer, because he would get to work and he said, I needed time before I got to work to get going. And he said, I felt like I was wading through pudding trying to get my brain to move. And what he described, I could not imagine waking up every day that way and feeling like that and knowing that it is not going to get better. And I think one of the things Julie would probably agree with me, we see with clients who have not just TBIs, but any long-term, ongoing, lifelong problem is the mental toll that it takes on them because there is no end in sight. You know, when you break your arm and it heals, you know that at some point they're going to take that cast off. And for the most part, life will go back to what it was before. But when you have this long-term, lifelong, no end in sight injury, it takes a mental toll on people and it drains on them. And it becomes is this going to be what it's like from now on?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing, the cases and the stories about those. And I wanted to ask one more thing. Is there, for both y'all, is there anything y'all would like to add to the topics, either TBIs or motorcycles?
My PSA, buy a helmet and wear it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're dealing with motorcycle wrecks, these are some of the only cases where I can absolutely say the majority of the cases that I've handled over the years that involve a motorcycle, those clients were either severely injured, and I'm talking, fractures, surgeries, paralysis, or they're dead. So, be careful on the roads, wear a helmet. It can be tragic, and they're really, really sad cases when they come in the door.
I think my other PSA would be to what Julie touched on just then, and that was be aware of motorists on the road. Julie and I talked about this yesterday, and that was when we looked at all the various motorcycle collisions we've handled, majority of the collisions that we have seen dealt with the other driver not being aware of the motorcycle rider, maybe pulling out into an intersection because they didn't see them coming, not realizing that they were turning and running through a red light and hitting them. We encourage all drivers, be aware of your motorcyclists while they're on the road. The collisions we see aren't typically rear end collisions. It's the ones where I didn't see them coming, and they turn out in front of them. Mm-hmm. And what we said is exactly right. Unfortunately, with our motorcycle collisions, I very rarely am seeing, I scraped my knee. It's usually fractures. It's severe injuries, lifelong, permanent injuries.
Yeah. Those are some good PSAs and to end out the show with. So yeah, that's it for this episode of The Verdict. Be sure to check out our other episodes, and for the other topics that surround, personal injuries with car crashes, motorcycle accidents, and the topics that surround them. And if you're listening to this on any podcast platform, be sure to rate us 5 stars. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Carlson Law Firm. And if you want to go into more detail about the topics presented in today's episode, we'll have links to relevant blogs in the video description. And check us out on social media. We're on social media at The Carlson Law Firm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We also have a Facebook page dedicated exclusively in Spanish for news and updates at Carlson Abogados. And lastly, if you're looking for an attorney, our bilingual team is happy to help. We offer free consultations. You can reach us at 800-359-5690. We take calls 24/7. So next time, thank you, Julie. Thank you, Kathryn, for joining me on this episode.